Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the assignment. So here is a link to a folder with the materials, or just the materials themselves if you need them. And then this is a link to the materials online. So this is where you can edit, fill things out, save it, all that stuff. So you can type in here. All right. So for the introduction, it says you want to use this handout with the click and learn. That's what we just did in the first video, is that interactive. So you want to use this handout along with the interactive. So that's basically what they're talking about. So you want to theoretically you want to have either the interactive up on your screen and on paper this handout, or you can split your screen and use the two together. So for the procedure, it says follow the instructions and answer the questions in the spaces below as you read. As you read through the click and learn. So I'm just going to go ahead and do something similar to that right now. I'll go ahead and open up the interactive and put that off to one side. Okay. And make this a little bit smaller. All right, I think that's going to be good. Okay, so got some pre-assessment questions here. So it says a graph of normally distributed data is commonly called a bell curve. Describe what this type of curve indicates about a group of measurements of individuals in the population. So what you want to be thinking about here is looking at the average, looking at how many measurements there are, and how those are distributed across the population. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to put this at 1,000 and just give you an example. So what I see is that I notice that there's more measurements around the average than there are further away from the average. So I'll give you an example. The count over here is the number of measurements. If I look at 20, there's only a couple of people who I measured at 20 kilograms. But if I go closer to the average, let's say right here, which I'm going to assume, let's say, is either 46 or 47, there's about 55 people whose mass was about 46, 47, 48 kilograms. So there are not very many people that I measured at 20 kilograms. There are a lot more people that I measured at 46, 47, 48. So what they're talking about here is when you have normally distributed data, the curve, what does it indicate about a group of measurements? Really what it's indicating is that the closer that you get to the average, and this is why the curve goes like this, so as I get closer to the average for that group, I get more and more people measuring at that particular value. I get to the average, and as I go further away from the average, I get less and less people measuring at a particular value. So the bell curve tells you that there's going to be not very many people far away from the average, and there's going to be a lot more people as you get closer to the average. So that's what they're talking about in number 1. This one requires you to read the text down here. So again, the idea of a sample and a population. So think about you have Pritzker as a population. You have the basketball team is the sample. So think about what those two things mean. Sample size, it tells you what that is. Remind yourself on the first video. Then this is just on the graph, what do you have on the x and the y axis? You can do that. The red line on the graph shows the distribution of masses. This asks you to describe the measurements. We kind of just talked about that. And then where on the curve is the mean value in a normal distribution. So if you look at this blue line, what part of the curve, this red curve, is the blue line actually at? All right. So then part one. So for part one, you're going to just set a bunch of parameters. So I'll just go over this first one with you, and then if you need to reset any parameters down here, you'll be able to do that. So let's just go ahead and set the parameters. So this one, it says I want a population mean of 50, and I can see that population mean, right now I'm at 50. I want a standard deviation of 5. So I'm going to change the standard deviation here to 5. And I want a sample size of 4. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to 4. Okay. And then I'm going to click resample. All right, so I resampled. Now it says increase the standard deviation in increments of 5 until I get to 50. So I want to look at the graph right now. Okay, I can see it. Now I'm going to increase this by 5, resample. Increase this by 5, resample. Increase this by 5, resample. And I want to do this until I get actually to 50. Now each time I do that, I want to look at how is the curve changing and how are my measurements changing. Okay. So right here where it says describe what happens to the distribution of masses in the population, represented by the red line, as you increase the standard deviation. So for our purposes, let's just look at the red line first. I can see something happen to it. I'm noticing that the red line is changing. How is it changing? That's what they're asking you there. And then it asks you in your own words to go ahead and define population standard deviation. Go ahead and read through this. Okay, you'll be able to read through this. Wherever it asks you to set parameters, make sure that you do set those parameters. Okay, and then here is where you're going to need to do this. Do that on your own. Okay. For number 11, so it says your instructor will assign a sample size to the whole class. Using that sample size, resample the population 10 times and record the mean of the samples in table 2. So the sample size that I want you guys to use is actually going to be 400. So I'm going to assign you guys right now, use a sample size of 400 here, and then you'll be able to look at the difference between a sample size of 4, sample size of 1,000, and then a sample size of, you know what, I'm going to change that actually from 400 to 100, so use 100. So you'll be able to compare 4, 100, and 1,000. And you'll be able to see what that actually does to your distribution as you do that. Okay. Let's see, blah, 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 blah. Okay. I'm going to hold off on that for right now. Tomorrow I'm going to upload another video where I show you how to do standard deviation, and I'll talk a little bit about standard error of the mean as well. So hopefully these videos are helpful for you. Let me know again if you have any questions, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Otherwise, hopefully this will give you a good head start, and look for those videos tomorrow.